Good evening from Fort Lauderdale and Happy New Year. Happy to be back with you. I hope you had a good break and you were able to relax a bit and we're getting back into the swing of things this week with our topic, iconoclasm. What we've been talking about and looking at throughout the semester throughout this session has been the power that images have. Images seem to compel belief. We believe in them. They do things. They work. They shape. They form. And that also means that certainly within the context of modernity and postmodern modernity, there is a conflict, a contest of images, of beliefs, of what it means to be virtuous, what it means to be good, what it means, what truth is. How best to live a life, how best to structure a just society. And so imagery plays an important role in this contest, and that means that not only are images compelling belief and participating in this idea of shaping and forming belief and practices, but images also then elicit a violent response. In the battle of images, there are victors and there are losers. There are images that are seen as destructive and shape and form individuals in ways that are believed to be untrue or to be unvirtuous. And so we have a battlefield of images, and we have a battlefield of meaning and significance and values. And so this notion of iconoclasm goes very well with what we've been looking at in terms of visual culture studies, in which the power of images to form and shape us, to represent what it means to what reality means and what reality is for us. And so within this context of this battle, we need to explore the aspect of violence, the violence in which images elicit this violence response. And the violence can take place both physically, in terms of taking hammers to works of art, destroying them, removing them, that we've seen in the history of the church, for example, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, that has a deep and committed and robust theology and practice of icon veneration, in which those images affect presence, the presence not only of Christ, but the presence of saints that intercede on our behalf, in which for centuries Christians have prayed with those icons, and they are a means of practical piety. They are means by which the belief is that they form and shape virtue, and they shape spirituality. But icons in the history of the church, in the Eastern Church, have not been uncontested. And in the 8th century, you have a very serious manifestation of iconoclasm in which those that affirmed the use of icons were killed, were exiled, or were maimed in various ways by the church. And it's also important to keep in mind that those that were iconoclasts, and for the most part they represented what is very interesting: the emperor, the secular rulers. Was that it was not simply that that the emperor in the Eastern Empire, the Byzantine emperor, disliked images. It was that he disliked certain images, and the importance of images was still prevalent, and the power of images. What he wanted, essentially, what the emperors wanted, who were iconoclasts, wanted their own image in churches. They wanted their presence in the context of the churches. In large part, they justified this desire from theological grounds, that the true image of Christ was in heaven, or the true image was in the sacrament. But in reality, much of the debate took place in terms of secular rule, took place in authority, and who was present. And the emperor wanted very much to emphasize his image. You have you have Caesar's image on coins. You have the emperor's images on currency. You have, in the tradition of iconography, icons developed in the context of ancestor worship, Roman ancestor worship, Egyptian and Roman ancestor worship, in which the presence of the departed, in which the presence of the ruler in the nether parts of his emperor, his empire, he was present through his visage, through the image. And so this notion of iconoclasm in the Eastern Church was much more than just a theological one. It had much to do with political power, had much to do with much more with earthly and mundane matters than just exalted spiritual or theological issues. And certainly within the context of the West, iconoclasm emerges also from the perspective of idolatry and the concern that the veneration that is given to God is given to images, given to artifacts, and so that is a concern that certainly in the context of the Old Testament, in the Hebrew tradition, you have both in Judaism and in Islam, you have a deeply embedded iconoclasm, which has significant implications for the present, particularly in the context of Islam and the issue, say, for example, with the Danish cartoon crisis in about 10 years ago. I also want to emphasize that violence against images don't necessarily have to take place solely in terms of taking a hammer to them, destroying them, taking them out of churches, vandalizing them physically. It can also take place verbally and through language, and violence in an attempt to suffocate images and to denigrate them, to create contexts in which they are seen as and interpreted and experienced as evil, as powerless, as not worth our visual attention, can also take place. So I'd like you to be thinking about not just the aspect in terms of physical violence and vandalism addressed to images in this battle and contest of the image wars, but also language and the use of written language, verbal language, in terms of how those images can be denigrated. What's also important within this context is for both sides, for the iconodules, the ones that venerate, that love images, and the iconoclasts, the ones that want to eliminate images, that want to destroy images. Both sides grant the power of images, that images are powerful things. And in many cases, we are all image breakers. We are we do violence to images, as well as loving images as well. So we are both the iconodules and the iconoclasts. And I think that's important to keep in mind, that iconoclasts are not just anti-intellectual Neanderthals that are not cultured and are afraid of images, for which images shouldn't generate fear. That in many cases, those of us that care about art, those that care about visual images, don't care about all visual images and don't like all works of art. That there are certain works of art that we privilege over others. And that even the iconoclasts in the various iconoclastic controversy, particularly during the Reformation, which is very interesting in terms of the development of the Gutenberg printing press. You have the development of of in Germany and Switzerland, you have Lutheranism and Calvinism. You have more extreme and radical Reformation movements. That iconoclasm manifesting itself as an anti-Catholicism was waged through images. That even the iconoclasts who did not grant the worth of icons or relics or visual imagery in the context of the church used images in pamphlets in order to affect the iconoclastic policies. So images are present, ever present. So is iconoclasm. And so I think one of the things that's interesting to think about this week are ways in which we are simultaneously the iconodules, the iconophiliacs, the ones that love images, and also the iconoclasts, the ones that fear them, that fear certain images, by the language we use, destroy them or suffocate them. And particularly for me as an art critic, my interest is to create space so that works of art can breathe, and to be able to create the potential for works of art, for visual imagery to have a future. And whether or not I love the work of art, the concern for me as a critic is to create the space that it has potential to be able to become something that it can be in the future. And so I think iconoclasm is something that that is an important part of modernity. It's an important part of visual culture studies, and I hope some of my reflections, as convoluted, as complicated as they may be tonight, might be helpful to you to guide your readings. So have a good night, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.